Hamilton Heights, Morningside Heights, Manhattan Valley, and the Upper West Side. He was first elected to the council in 2014. Notably, he has championed more investment in green spaces, particularly in low-income neighborhoods. And I'm also introducing Councilmember Costas Constantinides. He's from Queens, and he represents the 22nd Council District, which includes Astoria, East Elmhurst, Jackson Heights, and Woodside. He was first elected to the council in 2013. Notably, he has introduced several bills to reduce carbon emissions and fight climate change. Thank you.
All right, thank you, President Anthony, and I'd like to add that we are also expecting Jessica Mates, who is Chief of Staff to Borough President Gail Brewer.
All right. So yeah, you can clap for them. You can clap for them. But I also want to make sure that you recognize that they showed up. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. You get the message. Let me start off by asking the council members, and I do want to let people know Chairman Costa Constantinides is actually represents Astoria and some other parts of Queens, and so he has a street naming and another event in his district, so he will leave probably before things are completely over, and we want to make sure that we can get him out on time. So I want to make that announcement, so don't think he's being rude. He's let us know from the very beginning about that. And then I also just want to make sure that we are ready with our team to ask questions. So each council member has been briefed about how the process is going to go. And we're going to have questions from the WEAC team, which includes some of our leaders and members and staff. And so we're going to start out with Stephen Roundtree. Stephen is our state policy leader. And Stephen, take it away.
Sure. Good morning, council members. Thanks for being here today. The first question concerns lead poisoning and lead poisoning prevention. Exposure to lead hazards, particularly peeling or dusting paint in privately owned buildings, continue to cause cognitive and developmental harm to our children. When laws like the comprehensive abatement requirements of Local Law 1 of 2004 are not enforced, who is culpable? What are concrete steps the City Council can take to ensure existing laws are adequately enforced and operationalized?
So we'll start with Councilmember Mark.
Really? Good morning, WEAC. Buenos días, yo sé que hay traducción simultánea, pero para que sepan, aquí se habla todos los idiomas. I am so excited to be back with the #1 environmental justice organization on the planet. There is nobody that can compare to WEAC. You guys were environmentalists before environmentalism was cool. And your prophecy of the centrality of the environmental struggle has now finally gone into the mainstream. And we see candidates for president and members of Congress and even corporate CEOs now on the bandwagon of the movement that Peggy Shepard and WEAC and Cecil Corbin Mark and so many of you on this room helped to champion over decades. And so I'm proud to represent the community where it all began and proud to be a great partner with WEAC and all of you. And happy to say a few words about lead to kick us off. I happen to chair the Health Committee in the New York City Council. And you know that health and the environment are entirely intertwined. Because environmental concerns affect our health, and there's just no separating that. And that is true of lead as much as any other issue. And as Cecil mentioned, this city back in 2004, under the heroic leadership of Councilmember Bill Perkins, put on the books the most aggressive law in America to combat the scourge of lead poisoning. That was back in 2004, and that's become known as Local Law 2001. Now, I recently went back and read that historic law, and there's a line in there that says that Lead poisoning in New York City among children will be eliminated by the year 2010. And here we are, almost 9 years after the passage of that law. And we are averaging, every year, 4,000 new cases diagnosed of lead poisoning among children. This is current. This is a current ongoing crisis, 9 years after the date by which we promised in legislation that we would have ended this scourge. And it bears repeating that there is no safe level of lead exposure. There isn't. There's no such thing as a safe level of lead exposure. And that lead exposure to children who are very young, particularly 6 years and younger, can have lifelong implications. It can have implications on their mental development, on their academic success, on their social emotional development, ultimately on their career prospects. And Cecil's telling me I gotta speak faster.
No, not faster. Get to.
Okay, but we're having so much fun. I do think it's important to remind everybody of the deadly serious stakes for kids who are still in the city being exposed to lead poisoning every single year. And I might allow the chair of the committee to talk about the new legislation, unless Cecil wants me to do that as well. But I have to make one critical point. That bill that we put on the books, Local Law 1, is simply not being enforced. It's not being enforced. One of the key provisions is that when an apartment turns over, the landlord has to do a lead inspection and abatement. We had a hearing on this package of bills in September, and on the record, the health department could not confirm that there has been any enforcement against any landlord who has failed to live up to that provision of the law. And the reason is that when you move into an apartment, how do you know if the inspection was done? There's no way. The landlord can tell you it's done. How would you know? And so there's no way for a tenant, unsuspecting tenant, moving into an apartment to know if the apartment has lead, if there was an inspection, and if there was abatement as necessary. It's a fundamental flaw of the law. And so we are pushing provisions to require a third party to come in and do the inspection. By that I mean not the landlord. That they would have to hire an outside expert so that the inspection, and if needed, the abatement could be documented. And just on this very important package of bills, one of the key provisions is that we are going beyond the home. Because young people can also be poisoned by lead in their school, in a water fountain that has very old pipes made of lead. They could be in a daycare center or a child care center with peeling paint. They could even be in a park or playground, which could have lead contamination in the soil. And there are very, very old pipes in the water fountains and playgrounds as well, most of which are 50 years or more old. So one of the key things we do in this package of bills, which I'll go into more if we have time, is to expand the investigation. If a child is found with lead poisoning, it's not enough just to look at the apartment. We want to look everywhere they spend time. In the apartment where they live, if they have family members, grandparents, where they spend 10 hours or more a week, that apartment will be inspected, their child care setting, their daycare, their school, the park they play in. We are going to get to the bottom of this. We have a package of bills that would once again put us at the forefront nationally in this fight, and we need WEACT with us in ensuring passage of the most robust plan we can. Thank you.
Okay, so cool. Councilmember and Chairman Mark Levine chairs the Health Committee in the City Council. What can the Health Committee do, since you govern that committee, to deal with this issue? What are you prepared to say that you're willing to do around this issue with your committee?
Well, many of these bills actually go through the Health Committee. I think some might go through Costa's and some go through the Housing and Buildings Committee. But the Health Department is the inspector of record. The Health Department has the technical skills. And so we have all sorts of bills going through my committee that will ensure far more strict inspections. Some of it gets very technical. I'll give you one example. When they test water fountains, And remember, lead pipes were very common, really until, I guess, the 1960s and 70s. And traditionally, the way inspections of water fountains have been done is to open the tap and you let it run for a couple minutes, right? And then you do a test. Well, no child is ever going to do that in a water fountain. The child is thirsty, they're probably in a hurry, they're going to go to the water fountain, they're going to open it and drink. So we have a bill in my committee that will require what's called first draw testing. Just test it as soon as the water comes out.
And what about local law 1? What can your committee do with regards to the fact that local law 1 isn't being enforced?
Yes, now enforcement of that appears to be on the shoulders of HPD.
It does, but there is a DOH, Department of Health, set of components to it as well. Is there anything?
How about you tell me the answer to that question? So I can...
How about you have a hearing to figure out what DOH has been doing with regards to local law 1, and we maybe could do that maybe by Earth Day or later?
Okay, we did a hearing in September on this where we beat them up pretty hard on the failure to enforce local law 1. And obviously we haven't cracked that code, but we will work with you until we do.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. You can applaud. Chairman Costa Constantinides.
All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, great to be here in Manhattan. I don't really leave Queens all that often, but when I do leave Queens, it's for WEAC. So I want to thank, I came here really to hang out with that kick-butt woman, Peggy Shepard, who's amazing. Thank you, Peggy, for all that you do, and Cecil Colburn Mark as well, a good friend of mine. And we've worked in a lot of good legislation together, so thank you for having me this morning. And I get to also hang out with Mark Levine, who's an amazing health chair, a parks chair before that, and he's been a great leader on environmental issues, on open space issues, on health issues. Thank you, Mark, for your leadership. So I'll be brief. The hearing in September, I've been doing this for 13 years. I was a staffer for 7 years. I've been a member for almost 6 now. In 13 years, it was probably top 3 most frustrating hearings I'd ever been a part of. And it was because the administration could not recognize failure, could not apologize for the children that they failed. Our Speaker, Cora Johnson, several times asked them, will you apologize to the children who have gotten poisoned by lead on your watch? And they would not do it. They kept giving gobbledygook answers about how they're going to try harder, how they're going to work better, but at the end of the day, it's not sufficient. As Mark said, there's no level of lead that's safe. So, I know that hearing is a starting point for us to make sure we move legislation to hold them accountable. We're going to have more hearings beyond just the one we had in September to make sure that they are following up. It's not just enough to pass bills, but we have that oversight authority, so I know that we're going to have to follow up. I know that I have a piece of legislation, my son is 9 now, so he doesn't do this anymore. But when he was a baby, we'd bring him to the park, and kids eat dirt. Right? You've been to anyone who's been to a park with a toddler knows that if you're going to tell them not to eat dirt, that's a failing argument right out the gate. You're not going to win that fight. Dirt will be consumed. It's just the way. It doesn't matter how much dirt they're consuming. But we've seen, and the New York Times has been great about pointing this out, that our parks, certain parks that are near industrial sites, certain parks that are near highways, certain parks that are near environmental justice challenges are contaminated by lead. So I have a piece of legislation to actually test our park soil and make sure that we are looking at that as a potential source of contamination because, again, there's no level of lead that is safe. So whether it's looking at the lead levels, whether it's looking at our water pipes, whether it's looking at our schools, whether it's looking at our soil and parks, I'm working in partnership with Mark Levine and the Health Committee, with Robert Cornegie and the Housing and Buildings Committee to make sure we get this right. And I give you my commitment that I'm not going to say before Earth Day, because Earth Day is coming up and I have some other legislation that we're going to talk about that's also on your agenda. that we're looking to hear in April, and I'll get to that when that time comes. But we are going to look to definitely follow up on this bill within this calendar year, if that's fair.
Thank you. Ari?
Hi, my name is Tamara. I'm a high school intern at WEAC. I attend Beacon High School. And so recently in our school we had a debate on healthcare and just overall the availability and how we can create an affordable healthcare system for everyone. So it created, so it got me thinking of the question, how are you working to increase the availability of healthcare to community members living in low income and minority populated communities with environmental justice concerns?
And I want you guys to give her a round of applause because she's totally nervous. And we want to promote girl power, become woman power. All right? Thank you. Go ahead, guys. Question is, how are you working to promote affordable health care? What can the city council do?
Chair Constantinides is being very generous. Usually politicians fight to see who can go first, but we're two nice guys. Kamir, did I get your name right? Tamara, you are amazing. Oh my gosh, what grade are you in? 10th grade. If you're ever looking to do an internship in the New York City Council, please come to my office, because I think we need you in local government. Well, I have, as I mentioned, I chair the health committee, so this is an issue near and dear to my heart. There's a lot to this. I'll try and just focus on maybe two things very quickly. One is that the backbone of medical care for low-income communities, communities of color, for environmental justice neighborhoods in New York City is our public hospital system. It is H&H, we call it, health and hospitals. It is institutions like Harlem Hospital, which are an essential pillar of health uptown. And our public hospital system has been neglected and underfunded for years. And they are facing huge budget cuts. And you know how you know that? You try and make an appointment for a specialist at a public hospital, you better be prepared to wait 2 or 3 months. And you see some of these hospitals, they have out-of-date equipment, they have wiring that doesn't work, they have air conditioning systems that go in and out. We have neglected our public hospitals. And they are serving over 1 million patients a year. They serve more uninsured patients than all the other hospitals combined, more undocumented patients than all the other hospitals combined, and more mental health patients than all the other hospitals combined. We have to save our public hospitals, and I can talk if you want more about that, but that is absolutely critical. I want to speak about the one population of the city that has really gotten left behind by the progress we've made with Obamacare and other advances in spreading healthcare around, and that is undocumented New Yorkers who do not qualify for Obamacare programs or Medicare or any other of the publicly subsidized plans. So there are hundreds of thousands of immigrants in the city who have no other place to go except when they're in crisis to show up in an emergency room, where thank goodness they won't be turned away. But that is no way to manage your health. It's also not good for the public hospitals. We need to find a way to get every New Yorker, whether they're immigrant or not, documented or not, into primary care, to have an annual physical and get their vaccinations and have someone help them get their prescriptions filled. All the things that I hope all of you and all of us are currently benefiting from, but which the undocumented are not. Now, you might have seen that a couple of weeks ago, Mayor de Blasio announced a plan with very grandiose language, talking about universal health care in New York City, first place in America. And that turned out to be rhetoric that's a little beyond the substance of the plan. But there is a good piece of it that would help to bring undocumented into some of the public clinics. We want to go way beyond that and expand that to include nonprofit, community-based healthcare providers, many of which are immigrant-led, that speak the languages of immigrants, that have cultural competency, and I can talk more about that. We have a lot of work to do to make sure every single resident of the city, immigrant or not, gets basic primary health care, and I'm so glad that WEAC is engaged on this very important priority. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tamara, thank you. I appreciate it. When I was in 10th grade, I wasn't doing anything like this, so I am in awe of you. So thank you. So I'll be very brief. There's two things that I've been focused on as environmental chair, because I know we have an amazing healthcare who's doing so much. One is making sure, and again, I'm from Queens, not from Manhattan, so making sure that communities don't have to travel for care. Right? I mean, too often, if you live outside the catchment area of a large hospital in Manhattan, you're having a level of care that is less than others. And so my goal has been to bring resources to local hospitals in my district. We've been able to provide over $7.5 million in capital for our local hospital. One, to create the first stroke center in Queens is going to open in 2 months. So no one will have to travel over a bridge, because when it comes to your brain, there's no time. Time is your enemy. Every minute you're losing oxygen is a minute that you may not live. And then, so that's been a huge part of it. And then second has really been related to asthma. There are over 80,000 people with asthma in the city of New York. 4,000 of them are kids that are going to the hospital every year. I know that we need to do better. I have a couple of bills. One, that we create an asthma map for New York City. So we know community board by community board, ethnicity, age, who has asthma and where, pockets. Secondly, putting a nebulizer in every school. Because I know when my son has his asthma attacks, you need to make sure that if you can quiet it down, maybe an ambulance isn't needed. Or, because ambulances are expensive, right? Ambulance is the most expensive way to go through the healthcare system. And then also, if they're in danger of really not being able to breathe, it'll help open those airways and make it easier for when the ambulance does arrive. And then thirdly, looking at the asthma action plans. So if you have a child with asthma, they send you a paper home to school saying, here are the things, here's the protocol when my child has asthma, and your doctor is supposed to fill it out. But what happens with that? How is it being utilized? Is the school utilizing it well? Are the parents returning the document? We haven't really looked at that program to make sure it's doing what we thought it was going to do, and make sure that our kids are protected. So I'm working with our chair, Mark Levine, on these pieces of legislation to make sure we protect our kids and protect our communities from asthma. And once we know what the problems are, we can better deal with them.
All right. Question from one of our members from Inwood. Mark has asked us, not you, Mark is, I remember his name, Mark McAfee, has asked, we know due to climate change, natural disasters are affecting our communities. As a member of WEAC and the Harlem Emergency Network, he wants to know, do you support training our community on how to prepare for these climate-related disasters?
All right, so I'm going to go first this time. So I'm in the midst of a book right now called Uninhabitable Earth by Wells, and it talks about how this is the new normal. That climate change is everywhere, right? We are going to see, yesterday we had a hearing, a budget hearing for DEP, and they said, well, the reason we're having so many sewage backups, the reason we're having so many catch basins that are clogged is we had 23 inches more of rain last year than the year before, and so we're pulling more material out of our sewers. And then so those backups are impacting people's lives. They're going into your basements, it's sewage, it's making you sick. And I said to them, well, that's not going to get better. We're not going to see a time where there's going to be less rain. We're only going to see instances where the rain is going to get worse. We're going to see more precipitation. We're going to see more sewage backups. We're going to see more infrastructure challenges. And if we don't come up with real substantive plans to deal with that, our city is in real danger. We're going to see sea level rise of up to 2 feet on the conservative side by the year 2060, 2080. So we need to be training our communities. We need to make sure that, especially in our coastal neighborhoods, those in flood zones, which too often are communities of color and communities that environmental justice communities, that you're getting the training as to what happens, and that the jobs that we're creating, we're going to create a whole bunch of new jobs. They're saying 20% of 20,000 new jobs are going to be in the solar industry. It should be people in this room. It should be people coming from NYC getting those jobs. We should be training, creating middle-class windows to train them for those jobs of the future. So that's what we have to do to make sure that the new economy, the green economy, the one that we're never going back, like fossil fuel, coal, we're not going backwards, we're going forwards. The new normal is now. We have to continue to move our communities in that direction to get those trainings so you're not left behind.
Excellent.
The chairman gave a very thorough answer, so I'll just be very brief. Sometimes when I talk to people from uptown about the danger that climate change poses to us personally in this community, I hear some version of, but we're above sea level. We're not going to flood. We didn't flood in Sandy. And that's a very misguided sense of security, because there are all sorts of ways that this neighborhood could be impacted by the next superstorm. And when you're talking about the long-term implications of a warming planet, then there's undeniably devastating consequences. But look what happened in Hurricane Sandy in Lower Manhattan. And it's not that every inch of Lower Manhattan was underwater, but they lost power. And so any community with tall buildings, what are the implications of that? You have no elevator service. You often have no water service, because above 6 floors, water requires electric pumps. There are scenarios where you can lose heat if it's in a cold month. You could even lose functioning sewage systems. And if a disaster lasts long enough, supplies of food and other essentials are going to become scarce. Nobody is safe. Nobody is safe from the next natural disaster. And we can't just sit in our apartments and hope that emergency services are going to arrive. We have to have an infrastructure of neighborhood leaders who are ready to move on a moment's notice, who are in the buildings, who are on the blocks, who have a plan. They know where homebound seniors are. They know where people live who cannot use the stairs in the case of elevators going out. They know how to distribute water and other essential supplies if that's not available. And we're not there yet. We're really not there yet. So kudos to We Act and all of you thinking about this, but we need community-based, volunteer emergency response teams that are ready now before we're in the midst of the next disaster. Thank you.
Thank you. So once again, my name is Adi. I'm a community organizer here at We Act, and I'm a resident of Washington Heights. So as we all know, heat waves are currently the #1 weather-related killer in the United States. Almost half the New Yorkers who died from heat-related illness over the past decade were Black, and the city is expected to see over 3,300 annual heat-related deaths by 2080. How do you plan to support our communities in the face of this emerging climate-related public health threat?
So there's a couple of things that I'll talk about. One goes to your one of your main policy agenda items. So number 1, on page 4, the Department of Sustainability. Right now, the mayor has the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, right? It's a mayoralty. So they're pulling titles from different places. But not only that, cooling centers are not coordinated in the same way through that department. We're not thinking about these things, we're not bringing it into different agencies in the way that we should. So I have a piece of legislation, Intro 1399, to bring everything under one umbrella as the Department of Sustainability. That will create, we're not, as I said before, we're not going backwards. We're never going to spike the football and say we won against climate change. So we need to be able to put real dollars, and not just real physical dollar capital, but real intellectual capital behind a full Department of Sustainability that can better coordinate all of these efforts. And heat island effect and heat waves in particular, I have legislation on cooling centers, which are amazing, amazing programs, but there are still things we can do better, right? Right now, there isn't, the list isn't always available online when we need it. We're not updated on a regular basis. There's some things on there that we need to do better when it comes to cooling centers, and the administration has fought me on it and says it's too hard, but it's supposed to be hard. If nothing is worth doing that isn't hard, we need to make cooling centers available and able that you can depend on them, because they change from day to day, right? If you're on the computer, if you're someone who doesn't have regular computer access, and you go on the computer on Monday, and it says on Monday, your cooling center is going to be open. But you're maybe not going back to that library that week. But the cooling center is closed on Thursday. How would you know? You're going to go out in that heat, you're going to go down to that cooling center, and it's not open that day. But it was open on Monday the last time you looked at the computer. So we need to have a better system for people to be able to coordinate in cooling centers. They can know that when it's going to be open, how they can get there, and if you don't have easy computer access, you can have a schedule that you can depend on, not something that's haphazard that changes day to day.
So I'm assuming that support for the We Act policy bill of a wayfinding Climate Cooling Centers Act. And is that a yes?
Yes.
And is that a yes from Councilmember Markle? Did you want to say something, or are you here?
I'll just be very brief. I fully support everything the chair said, and fully support this legislation. And I'll just state the obvious, which is that as the planet warms, as we face record high temperatures, people who are wealthy are going to be able to adapt. They're going to be able to afford to buy a bigger air conditioner and run it all year. If they're living next to a coast where the water's rising, they're going to be able to afford to move to higher ground. If God forbid, and this could happen, we have crop failures and agriculture failing around the world because of rising temperatures, and prices of food go up, the wealthy people will be able to pay more for their food. Low-income people all over the world, here in the city, here in this neighborhood, who are going to be far, far, far more vulnerable to those changes. So that we must have an environmental justice prism by which we look at the impending climate disaster. I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, and the chair and Cecil and others have laid out some very good concrete policies close to home to make that happen, which I fully support.
Okay, so thank you. I'm going to follow up on that question. That was a question obviously related to extreme heat. Under the LIHEAP, which is a low-income heat, energy, and assistance program, people can get supplemental resources and money to help support their heating costs in winter. The climate crisis is showing us, yes, winters may be colder, but it's also showing us that summers will be hotter, right? And so might you consider and think about the way in which the city could help supply costs for air conditioners or support electrical bills for people who are running air conditioners in order to keep themselves cool but don't have the means by which to do that. And they weren't put in that situation by themselves, obviously, it's a climate-related issue. So what about that?
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Let's make it happen.
Okay, let's make it happen. All right. Anthony, one of our planning committee members, has a question.
Hi again. So this is a Community Board 9 related question, but I'd like both your input. Instead of installing bike lanes along Amsterdam Avenue, why not have dedicated bus lanes for the slowest bus lines? The M100 and the M101, which longtime community residents have asked for. This would be more environmentally friendly and improve the lives of more New Yorkers, as opposed to bike lanes which simply increase real estate values, as has been shown in places like Bushwick, Brooklyn, and elsewhere.
All right, so I'm going to be very brief because I'm not from Manhattan, but I'll say this. I think too often we pit two environmentally good policies against one another. And I think that is, if we're arguing over one or the other, I think we're setting ourselves up for failure. We should be talking about how we can get more bus lanes. We should be talking about how we can get more bike lanes. We should be talking about all of those things together. But I know there's, like, real estate is tight. But we need to make sure that we're keeping our eyes on the prize. Too often we're getting into this argument between two really good ideas and pitting them against one another. We should try to not do that. But that's, I don't live in Manhattan, so I'm not going to take a position on a particular bike lane here in Upper Manhattan.
He's going to leave that for the local council to take.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Look, we are not going to end climate change if we don't get beyond the era of obsession with private cars.
Yes.
It's just a reality. The internal combustion engine has been the single biggest source of the climate disaster that we're facing right now. And environmentalists need to start showing up in the fights over the way we're going to be designing and using our streets, because it is directly impacting the climate change issue, and by the way, the air quality issue. I know that WEAC has been a leader on questions of asthma, and obviously automobile fumes are a driver of that. So we need to give people every alternative possible to private car ownership, to using a private car for every single trip, no matter how far and no matter where. And so I'm in support of every alternative. First and foremost, mass transit. And so saving our subways, saving our buses is an environmental issue. Absolutely. And making it safer and easier to walk is absolutely an environmental issue and a health issue. And there's all sorts of things we can and need to do about our street design. And yes, making it easier for people to ride bicycles safely is much better than having them in a private car with the exhaust fumes and all that, and with the danger that it poses. And if you look at Amsterdam Avenue, from 110th Street to 155th Street, we're averaging 100 injuries, in some cases fatalities, a year amongst traffic crashes just on that stretch. So we have to fix that. We have to make it safer. But I got to tell you guys, in Community Board 9, there is massive pushback if you do anything to limit even one parking space, or in take 1 inch away of automobile traffic travel lanes. And to give you one stark example of this, I brought a program to this neighborhood that for the first time allows for car shares to be parked on local streets. Because for the environment to have 50 families share one car share, as opposed to having 50 private vehicles, each for every family, is a massive win. This is the kind of strategy we have to employ if we're going to save our environment. And you would not believe the pushback that we got on this policy because of 2 parking spots being transitioned from private vehicle parking to car share parking. Massive pushback, massive pushback. And there were no environmentalists that I saw in any of the community board meetings speaking up on behalf of this program, I have to say. And if you look at the Amsterdam Avenue redesign, I would love to have a bus lane. We have a plan that's far more modest, that over that stretch of 45 blocks will yield a net loss of 6 parking spots because of improvements we're making for safety and other things. And it is being fought aggressively. And again, I haven't seen environmentalists showing up in that debate making the environmental climate change argument. And I thought right when I got into office on 125th Street, and on this WEAC was very active and a great ally, to get a bus lane on 125th Street, which has some of the worst traffic in the city. Honestly, before that bus lane, it was much faster to walk the whole length of 125th, excuse me, than it was to get on one of the buses. And the battle to get that bus lane in was epic. It was epic. And we did finally get it. And now I hear every day about how much better traffic and travel is on 125th Street. And you can applaud for that, absolutely. Part of the nature of these changes is people are nervous about changing the streets, which I get. And then once we modernize them, generally people are very, very happy. And lastly, on bikes, you know, I don't think it's fair that the only communities which have infrastructure like City Bike happen to be wealthier, whiter neighborhoods. I don't think that's fair. I think every community who wants it should have access to bike share. I talk to people all the time uptown who say they would be happy to get a City Bike membership, but it's not in their neighborhood. And so I'm very, very happy that we have now brought City Bike up to 130th Street. And here again, before we bring this program in, I got lots of complaints about space being taken up by the racks. You know what the #1 complaint I get now that we've expanded it to 130th Street? There are not enough bikes. The racks empty out too early in the morning. Proof of the demand in the neighborhood. Look at any of the racks for City Bike. Often by 9 a.m., they're all empty. So somebody is using the bikes. And so I want every neighborhood. I want this neighborhood. I want West Harlem. I want Inwood. I want Hamilton Heights. Every neighborhood to have every alternative transportation possible to be safe, to be environmental, and to have a true 21st century transportation system.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna stick there and stay close. Give me one. Indulge me for 1 second. This is a question from Ray Carpio. He's asking about why there isn't more public parking in the Heights and Hamilton Heights. So maybe you want to say 2 words about public parking. 2 words, Mark, about public parking. Just whatever you want to say, but 2 words.
How about 3 words?
3 words. You get 3. All right. That's a good negotiation.
Okay. Residential parking permits.
Explain what that is briefly.
We have a huge problem of New Jersey commuters coming into our neighborhood and dumping their cars on free parking on neighborhood streets and then hopping on the mass transit because they don't want to pay for parking downtown. And you can just see it, especially near the GW Bridge. In the morning, it tends to be luxury vehicles with Jersey plates circling looking for parking. Just hang out around 8 a.m. near the GW Bridge. It's not only there, it's all up and down uptown Manhattan, and also the Upper West Side. It is suburbanites who don't want to take mass transit. And so I have proposed a residential parking permit program, which would reserve local streets for people who live here. Because we want the people coming from Jersey to either take mass transit, or they can carpool, or if they insist on taking the private car, let them pay for a garage wherever they're going. And I strongly support congestion pricing. This may be a later plan, but I hope we're going to do this. It's a huge environmental priority. But if that happens, I think more commuters are going to be dumping their cars uptown. So we need this program. It's been a big fight. The city's resisting it. I would love WEAC involved in this fight.
All right. So So next, our member Kiota and her son Gabriel, who's always active and engaged, have a question for you.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Kyoto. I've been an active member WEAC, and I also volunteer as a corporate food share. I just wanted to share that I'm a housing advocate, and I work with families that have family members with a disability. And what are you going to be doing to create affordable housing for those families that have limited income?
So again, I'm Queens, not Manhattan, but I've actually pledged to build 500 units of senior affordable housing in my district before I leave office. And in our first year, I made that pledge last year, we took a public parking lot, a municipal parking lot, that was about 70 spots. They had some long-term parking there, so people from Eastern Queens or from Long Island were driving to Astoria and jumping on the train. And I'm happy that those people took advantage of that for as long as they did. But we have a space crunch. So I proposed to the city to take that parking lot and build 150 units of senior affordable housing, and we funded it in last year's budget. So we are still evaluating every city property, and not that parking isn't important. I mean, not finding a parking space stinks. Not having a place to live is a tragedy. So we need to look at every single spot, every single piece of city property, every opportunity for public-private partnership. We need to find affordable housing for all levels. Because I know my district is 22,000 seniors are on a list waiting, the highest in New York City. So that 500 units I'm fighting for, I know is a very small rock in a very large bucket. But we need all to be thinking about how we can find affordable housing, because if we don't, things are only going to get worse, and the people who made our neighborhoods great are going to be forced out by gentrification, forced out by rising rents. So we need, if Albany won't give us control of our rent regulations, we need to do everything we can to control the conversation here in the city of affordable housing.
Well, we're getting to the point where anyone short of a millionaire is struggling to pay for housing in New York City, including people with decent salaries, middle-class salaries, teachers, bus drivers, nurses, and others. But there's one segment of the population of the city that is undeniably facing the most severe crisis in affordability, and that is our homeless New Yorkers. And we right now as a city, we have, in many ways, a record economy. Employment's at an all-time high, tourism's at an all-time high, construction is booming, our city budget is at an all-time high. I think we're going to pass a $92 billion budget in June, we'll see. So it is absolutely a moral failing that amidst all this economic prosperity, we have the most people in our homeless shelters at any point since the Great Depression, averaging 62,000 people a night, 40% of them kids, 24,000 of them are kids. That is a profound moral failing. And there's no shortcut to ending homelessness other than creating more homes. We need more homes. That's the way you end homelessness. It's a very, very simple proposition. Now, we have a very ambitious program to build more affordable housing that Mayor de Blasio has put forward, which is ambitious and I support, which is 300,000 units over 10 years. But only a very, very, very small portion of those units are dedicated to homeless families. Only a very small portion. It's about 5%. Now, most of that 5% are preserved or rehabilitated housing, not new construction. Now, I'm all for preserving every affordable unit in the city. We should do more of it. But that doesn't really work for homeless people, because that means you're waiting until the family living there eventually moves out. And I hope they don't move out. I hope they keep their affordable housing. And so for homeless families, it's only a trickle of new units available out of preserved houses. We have to build. We have to build homeless housing, and so I have signed on to a plan that would require our city to build 30,000, that's 10% of the total, units that are dedicated to homeless people. This would be a game change for homelessness in the city, and we have a strong coalition in the council among faith leaders that it would be great to get WEACT involved in. It's a very reasonable ask. We want 30,000 affordable homes that are dedicated to homeless New Yorkers.
Thank you, and very quickly, just following up on that, one of our planning committee members has a question related to the same topic, very succinct.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Juan, and I'm part of the planning committee. Thank you for coming, dedicating your time. And the question is, has the council considered funding community land trust? It has worked in the North Manhattan, has worked in some part of the other country.
Funding community land trust as a way to build affordable housing for homeless folks.
I mean, I know that, yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. It's something I know that Councilmember Richards recently passed legislation relating to public land trusts. It's something that we all need to, we look at every opportunity, right? We need to make sure we can take every opportunity. I also think as we're building...
Yes is a good answer.
Yes is an answer. Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right. Let's throw one thing in.
Okay.
I think we should also think about how we're building buildings. Right? I mean, that's the thing I want to show in there, is that the senior affordable housing that we're building in Astoria is going to be built passive house. So we
What does that mean?
Huh?
Maybe not everybody in the audience understands what passive house means.
So we're going to make sure that we build it to an environmental standard that is really going to be what net neutral or like less than 25%, right? We want to make sure that we're building high quality housing for seniors that will be environmentally friendly and not put additional resources, additional carbon into the air. So that's just my one piece I want to say quickly, is we want to make sure that now that we're building more, that we're building the right types of buildings.
Good answer.
Great answer. I'm a huge fan of community land trusts, CLTs. Ownership is the key. And if you want to empower a community, when they own the land, that is permanent control to make sure that it remains affordable, to make sure that the community can manage it, direct it, and retain control. And we have a wonderful Uptown Community Land Trust Coalition that is working diligently throughout West Harlem, Washington Heights, and Inwood, maybe beyond. And I'm working with them to try and secure particularly one site, which is on 158th Street. It's known as Safety City. It's between basically Riverside and getting up towards Broadway. It's a big fight. DOT's using it, but there are others. But I'm a strong supporter of the community land trust model.
Great. So we have a question from our members as well. As legislation passes to improve health of our homes, how can you prevent rents from increasing and gentrification of our community? I think that's a reference to 1253, so Costa. Keep it over there. You guys can keep it.
All right, so 1253. So you want to stand up?
Yes.
All right, there you go. Okay, so Intro 1253 will retrofit any large buildings. So let's give you economies of scale. There are about 50,000 buildings in New York City that are 25,000 square feet and above, out of a stock of over 1.1 million buildings. So 50,000 out of 1.1 million, and those 50,000 account for 30% of the city's emissions. So that's a really sobering thing. 50,000 buildings, 30% emissions. So that's what Intro 1253 deals with. It deals with retrofitting those large buildings. Now what we didn't want to see happen is, again, talking about not having clashes between two good ideas. Not having a clash between environmental conservation and protecting tenants. So what we've done we've put together as a working group that has worked together, groups across the city, housing advocates, environmentalists, that have come together with a plan that we're going to implement that has a list of things where we can walk up, right up to the line of an MCI, so the buildings are still participating, because too often, we don't want to create a city of two New Yorks, right? One where you can afford to get retrofits, and then where you can't. But we also want to make sure the rents don't go up. So we're going to describe these buildings and do a whole bunch of things that are not MCI eligible. So build the rent-regulated building, even if it's even one rent-regulated unit in the building, they will not have to do the same retrofit as other buildings, but they'll have to do a list of things that will still have their buildings be cleaner and greener, but will not cause an MCI. So rents will not go up. You will not have a permanent increase from the from a rent increase due to MCI. That's the compromise that we had to have in this bill to make 1253 work.
Thank you. All right. Where do you stand on the social justice and environmental issue policy of cannabis in New York City? And also they want to ask the question of could either taxes or other resources raised from cannabis be used to fund the MTA to make sure that that service remains and that it remains environmentally responsible? I think that's the question.
Well, the question actually on the environmental responsible is the cannabis industry is not environmentally responsible in terms of packaging and all of that out west. Everyone's addressing and coming here and using the tax and all of that, but what regulations are you putting on that industry to make sure it's environmentally sound out east?
Thank you. Thank you, Mariam. Thank you.
Great question, Mariam. I mean, just to say, for starters, that I think that the prohibition on marijuana has failed on many fronts. One very glaring failure is the disproportionate law enforcement impact it's had on communities of color, on young people of color who have often had their lives derailed by law enforcement action related to the prohibition on marijuana. There are other reasons why I think we need to tax and regulate marijuana, but this is a profound one. And so in our plans to move beyond prohibition, we better keep in mind the communities that suffered over the decades of over-enforcement and resulting mass incarceration due to the prohibition. And that means expunging the records of people who have nonviolent offenses. And it means, and Mary was getting to a key point, it means let's think about the kind of industry that's going to emerge that is going to now legally sell marijuana. And let's make sure the same thing doesn't happen as happens in every other industry, which is that it becomes dominated by massive corporations. Let's find a way for neighborhood entrepreneurs in the very communities, again, that have been unfairly impacted by the prohibition. Let's find a way for neighborhood entrepreneurs to emerge with viable businesses out of this. And I want to commend Miriam for another point, which is let's think about the environmental impact of an industry. When have we ever had the chance to design an industry from scratch? It's almost unique. Let's do it with environmentalism in mind. And you're right to point out about packaging and probably energy efficiency, maybe the chemicals used in the growing. I have to admit I haven't thought through it all. But what a unique opportunity from the drawing board to create an industry which has environmentalism built into its DNA. Great question, Mary.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you. So, as I said to you at the beginning, Chairman Costa Constantinides has to go back to his district. I'm going to give him a few minutes to say a couple of closing words. And also, he's going to talk about the solar farms bill for Rikers Island. He is one of the people that we've been working with around this issue, and so he has a few things he wants to say there.
Thank you, Cecil. And I want to thank WEAC for having me here this morning and the opportunity to speak with you all and talk about these issues. And I wanted to make sure I close relating to Rikers Island. We all know the social justice reasons that Rikers Island should close. The communities of color, mass incarceration, tearing apart of neighborhoods, low-level offenses, sentencing people to lifetimes of retribution. There's a bad history on that island. We know that. And too often, in the same environmental justice communities that were torn apart by mass incarceration, by the things we've just talked about, also power plants were placed. In 2000, the Power Now, in California there were these roving blackouts. And they took that as an opportunity to open 11 new power plants in New York. All of them in environmental justice communities without asking those communities if they wanted those power plants. I know that the ones in my community went in Western Queens next to the Queensbridge houses, the Ravenswood houses, and the Astoria houses. It was wrong. And we were told that they were only going to be there for 3 years. Well, 18 years later, they're now eligible to vote. That is unconscionable. So now that we have this opportunity to think about, Mark just talked about, we don't have the opportunity to think about anything from scratch. Here is this opportunity at Rikers Island to right a lot of wrongs. Here's an opportunity for us to think about taking this from scratch and what can go there. I worked with WEAC, and we've had this conversation, and we've worked with the CUNY Law Center for Urban Environmental Justice. And we found, based on information that we have, that if we take just 1/4 of the island, 100 acres, that would be enough solar power to replace every power plant that was built since 2000. And if we follow the Lippman Commission report to move a massive wastewater treatment plant to the island, we can reclaim neighborhoods. We can reclaim Northern Astoria and the Bowery Bay Sewage Treatment Plant. We can reclaim the land in the South Bronx and Manhattan from their wastewater treatment plants. And again, build a wastewater treatment plant facility from scratch that is based on resiliency and sustainability. And then, so we're not having water, it's like CSOs, pollution and sewage going into our waterways, polluting our rivers and our streams, making them unfishable and unswimmable. We have an opportunity here to redesign what happens at Rikers from scratch. And what I will say in closing is that we don't need another runway in Queens. LaGuardia Airport's right there. We don't, there's been some talk that maybe there's going to be a tearing up of Bowery Bay and Flushing Bay to build an additional runway there. That's not what needs to happen. We don't need more people coming to our city by airplane. We need a runway to renewables. We need a runway to a better New York. We need a runway for a cleaner New York. So as the council member who actually represents Rikers Island, which no one ever really thinks about, but the one way on or off Rikers Island is through my district in Astoria. We don't want an additional runway there. We don't want, in Manhattan and Brooklyn, the Bronx and Brooklyn, we don't want another runway there. We want that runway to renewables and to a cleaner city. So we're going to fight together. I'm looking forward to partnering with WEAC on this as we come up with a grander vision and think about these issues more holistically and not let a creed come down from Albany or anywhere else saying this is what we're going to do with property that is owned by the city of New York. Right. Thank you very much for having us here today.
All right, so thank you very much, Chairman Constantinides. We look forward to working with you. Okay, so we're gonna close. We're gonna bring this to a close out. I do need to offer apologies on behalf of Councilmember Bill Perkins. He has gone to a funeral of a Harlem giant, Don Eaton, who was one of the early African-American members of the United States Air Force. Sadly passed away at the end of last month, and his funeral is taking place, so he has texted and apologized. So that's that. We don't have any word from Councilmember Ayala. She has basically said she wasn't coming, so that's that. I'm going to try to run through a couple of quick questions. I'll try to put them together, Mark, and we're going to go for about another 10 or so, and then let you finish up as well, because I know you have other things to get on to the day as well, and appreciate you being here. If landlords must use a third-party lead inspector, how do we incentivize them to pay for it? Should we hold them accountable with fines? And also how to make sure that the landlord doesn't pass this cost along to tenants as well? Question.
Great question. Briefly, lead is really a problem in older apartment buildings which are not in good shape. And those buildings, overwhelmingly, especially in Manhattan, are rent stabilized, and therefore the landlord simply can't pass on any expense they want to the tenant because the rent is regulated, and costs for things like lead inspections are not covered by the so-called major capital improvement MCI surcharge. So for apartments that are rent regulated, which I really think is the vast majority of private housing that where lead is a risk, the landlord can't pass this on. So I don't think tenants have to worry about the cost. That's my answer on that.
Okay. Thank you for a quick answer. Nicole from West Harlem has also asked, she wants to know when will they give out reduced fare, MTA fares to lower income people? Do you have any answer on that?
This is an amazing program. How many of you have heard of fair fares? Okay.
Just a quick explanation of it.
So, it's getting harder to afford everything in the city. We've mostly talked about housing tonight, but transportation as well. And if you can't afford a Metro card, then you can't get to work, you can't get to your college classes, you might not be able to get somewhere to drop your child off to daycare. So really, the affordability of transportation touches almost every aspect of a person's life. And so I'm really proud that the City Council, I really have to give credit to the Council Speaker, Corey Johnson, who pushed really hard for this in the last budget, created a program called Fair Fares, which is going to be half-price Metro cards for people who are at the poverty level or below. Like what you now have as a senior citizen, which has been very successful, but this would be for people of any age who are at the poverty level or below. Now, great idea. Implementation has been a lot slower than we would have liked. And in January, February, we announced the first little piece of it, which is people who get cash assistance, which is a very small piece. If you get cash assistance, public assistance, they're now eligible. And coming up, I think it's October, sorry, I don't know the exact date, 2 more groups are going to be added. One is residents of NYC, who fall under the income threshold. And the second is people who get food stamps. Again, who fall under the income threshold. And that's going to be by October. Ultimately, there are as many as 800,000 New Yorkers who will be eligible, but it's being phased in group by group by group. If you are in one of these groups, you can call 311. You can also always call my office, and we can help you with your enrollment. We really want everybody who's eligible to take advantage of this very important new program, Fair Fares.
Okay, thank you. And we'll stay in touch with you. I promise I'll get back to you, okay? But I have a stack and I want to respect that. So just hold on. Write your question down so that you don't forget it, all right? Josette, one of our long-term members, also says, the City Council of New York, New Jersey has enacted aggressive legislation to protect people of color in neighborhoods like Bed-Stuy, Bushwick, Harlem, and the South Bronx from toxic gentrification. Why can't our City Council do the same? And would you support something like that?
Do you know what that law does?
I don't know. Josette?
Yes.
Do you know what the law, how does the law actually work? You gotta say it quickly.
I don't know. I listen to New Jersey Public Radio.
Okay.
But they realize that the same kind of obvious law that we're dealing with is impacting their long historical communities. They did it. I'd actually like to get Ross Barak or someone from his office here
Okay.
for REACT meetings.
Okay. So Mark, why don't we do this way? We're gonna find out more about this and then we'll come back to you on that, okay? Fair enough? So this is a question about monitoring, another one around lead. Who will be doing the monitoring of the lead study by your office? And will WEAC have information to show that your office is actually doing the work? I'm not, does this question sound familiar to someone that wants to say or own it? Okay, we'll come back to this, we'll figure it out and get you an answer on that. So this is a deeper dive question. So this Bill 267 is Donovan's bill, Donovan Richards' bill. They're saying with the language, someone has done their homework. The language on the bill requiring that roofs of certain new buildings be partially covered in plants or solar panels, how would that be enforced? The language seems vague and slippery.
So this bill requires, tell me what this.
So the bill requires that there be provisions that incentivize the use of green roofs on buildings on certain new buildings across the city. It's anchored into sometimes the funding that comes from the city. But I guess the bottom line of the question is, how would this be enforced? Part of it is through the Department of Buildings. That's who essentially would be enforcing some of the provisions of this Intro 267. And the language being vague and slippery, if someone wrote that question down, come up and see me, and then I can talk to you a little bit more about it. And then we can also work with Councilmember Levine so that he knows what our concerns are. I want to just quickly move on to one or two more questions. Can you talk about how the Zero Waste Initiative will impact Northern Manhattan? That's coming from Vanessa. Zero Waste Initiative, the Zero Waste Initiative that is part of the One NYC plan.
So this is recycling and
moving towards zero waste, so doing more recycling, but also getting certain forms of waste out of the street, like composting and stuff like that. Yeah.
yes. So New York City, for all its environmental chops, is way behind the rest of the country on recycling. I think we are recycling, 17, 18% of our waste right now. Again, we are way, way below the rest of the country. We have to do much better than that. One major step forward we have to take is recycling of organics, aka composting. And this is starting to be rolled out in some neighborhoods, but not uptown Manhattan, unfortunately. And I'm not happy about that. But if you go through kind of brownstone Brooklyn or single-family neighborhoods of Brooklyn, you'll see little brown plastic containers on the curb next to the trash bin. That is for the city will collect composting. And we need curbside composting collection uptown. Now that's going to require supers to do the work. And so there's been a little bit of resistance on that front. But I want uptown Manhattan to have the benefit of composting. Right now, you have to store it in your kitchen and take it to a farmer's market somewhere on whatever day of week they're open. And other than great environmental activists like some of you, most New Yorkers are not going to do that. They need to be able to do it in their building, and then the building needs to be able to push it onto the curb, and then we will hit our goals. Miriam has a question.
Is it, hold on one second, Mary, because I have a question that's it's related, yes? Alan, I need you to come. Sorry, and I need you to talk into the mic.
I just wanted to make a statement. I live in Park West Village, and we do have composting. We've had it for about a year. We might be the only. You are.
So there are a few places that have it, but the point that I think the council member was making is that we need more widespread.
If you want buildings to do this, you gotta train people on what composting is. It's very complicated. If you have rodents or pests in your building, and you use composting, it's like you have to just
So Miriam is making the point that if we want more composting to happen, there has to be aggressive training of supers, because if you are composting, which is essentially taking food scraps and helping to turn them into viable products for our agricultural sector and other things, you are essentially creating a feast for the rodents. And so we have to know how to do this really well and effectively, so that it doesn't sort of increase the rat population, which we all know we have a problem with. Okay, we are coming up on time for this, and so I just want to do two quick things. The council has the responsibility of reviewing and then passing the mayor's budget. Every year, the mayor puts out a budget, and that budget has all kinds of impacts on our communities. And so I just wanted Councilmember Levine to just give us a sense of how is that process going. You made reference earlier that we might be passing a record budget this year. How does that impact us in terms of environment, in terms of health, open space, etc.? What are you expecting out of the budget process? You can then answer that question, and then we'll get to the closing statement. Okay.
I'm going to be very quick because I know it's late, but this is budget season down at City Hall, and we are engaged in the epic battle over a $92 billion budget, the battle over how we're going to spend your money and our money on the priorities we care about. This is my 6th budget cycle since I was first elected, and this is the first time where we may be facing some sort of across-the-board cuts because of slowing tax revenue. Now, the amount of those cuts we don't know yet, but the mayor has proposed something of an across-the-board cut. Now, that might be necessary, but it certainly worries me because I care about our health budget and our parks budget and our DEP budget and our housing budget and so much more. And so I want to know details, but the Parks Department is slated to get a 3% budget cut, and we've already cut to the bone on parks maintenance. The Health Department is slated.
Can you stop for 1 second? I just need everybody to just respect the process. We're getting down to the end, so can we just give attention? We're going to wrap up. I know it's a lot of talking, but can we just keep it to a minimum? Thank you.
I'll just say that we have a lot of concerns about how these cuts will impact us and our priorities in the agencies that we're focused on. I invite all of you to make your voice heard in the coming months. You can speak at the Health Department's budget hearing, which I can look up right now and tell you the date. It's in the next week or two. Before the next question, I will get you that answer. The public can testify at budget hearings. Come on out. Tell us what you care about. Tell us how these cuts will affect you and your priorities and your communities. Let's engage in a very healthy debate between now and June to make sure we have the best budget we can get.
Okay, thank you for that. So we can look at the dates in 1 second, Councilmember. Two things. So as part of our city policy agenda, we want to reiterate to you that our top priority on the issue of lead is enforcement of Local Law 1 of 2004. And so you said to us that you're going to try to figure out doing another oversight hearing. You did one back in September. Obviously they haven't fixed all of the issues. We should probably do an oversight hearing until they get sick of coming before you to figure out when they're going to fix this problem around enforcement. So that's number one. Number two, Local Law 60 and 64 of 2017. Those are the EJ bills that passed. They are now a law of the city. The speaker has not appointed people to the EJ Advisory Committee. That needs to happen. It's our understanding the mayor's office is ready to go. We don't have any council-appointed speakers, and the law requires that there are people appointed from the EJ communities and the EJ advocacy community in particular to be on that. There are lots of EJ organizations around the city, and they're ready to go, they're waiting, and that hasn't happened. And we're asking you to make this something that you bring up in your conversations with the speaker and figure out how we can get that done. Is that cool?
Very cool.
Okay. Environmental justice, the environmental justice laws, thank you, sorry, appreciate that, no acronyms, we promise. And then local law 55 of 2018, which is the Asthma-Free Homes Act, will require landlords to take care of their buildings that have mold if there's someone with a medically diagnosed respiratory illness. We're asking you as chair of the health committee, even though this law, HPD is also responsible for carrying out this law, there is also health department provisions of the law as well. And so we're asking you to make sure that we keep asking the question of when is this actually getting started to be enforced. Our experience under local law 1 has taught us that we can't take our eyes off of these things. A lot of hard work from WEACT and others, Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation, went into making local law 1 of 2004. The lead poisoning law happened, and now, 14, 15 years later, we still have no enforcement. So, reminding you about that. And then, the last thing that I have to say is we have some bill opportunities here, Council Member. There's a Wayfinding Act. We know that climate and heat are a major health issue for our people. In fact, it is the #1 way in which the climate crisis impacts particularly EJ communities. And so we're wondering if that might be something you might be interested in becoming a sponsor of. So you can say that into the mic.
Absolutely.
Okay, you heard it here. I just also want to say thank you for taking the time. And I know that I have Genesis, but before we do that, how about we give Councilmember Mark Levine a round of applause for being on time and for being here, right? It counts, and he speaks Spanish fluently. He's the first council member that we have in our district that can actually, who is not a native Spanish speaker, who can actually speak Spanish fluently. So we want to thank him for that. Lastly, for all of the WEACT members that are here, once again, those of you that are WEACT members, show your hands, please. Thank you so much. Please make sure and tell your friends to come to our meetings. Encourage them to become voters. We sign up, we have registration cards for people to sign up to become voters. If anybody has not become a registered voter just yet, that is part of what we do. We believe in making our power felt. Our membership is 700 plus and growing strong. We are deeply appreciative of all the time that you all take to come out. And 80% of our members vote, right, Genesis? 80% of our members vote. So thank you for exercising your right. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Genesis, and we had 100 people here today, so thank you all for coming out.
Thank you, sir.